Hey there, Misketeers! Welcome back to Missing Out Mondays, where we tell you what we're into. Start your week off right. I'm Tari J.
I'm Lex Michael.
So, this week, Lex Michael,
Yes.
I checked out the Amazon Studios series, The Boys.
Ooh, I got a couple of friends that have checked that out. What did you think? Because I'm hearing some consistently pretty positive and interesting things.
I think that the experience of watching it is entertaining. I think that it is a creation out of its time. I think that it would have best been, because if you know anything about The Boys, you'll know that the graphic novel and this series are kind of a take on what it would be like if you lived in a realistic world with the Justice League. So all of their like corporate heroes, the Seven, are based on our main seven of the Justice League. So there is a Superman, a Wonder Woman, a Flash, a Green Lantern, a Batman. There is a Aquaman, and then you have
Depending on which iteration, is it a cyborg? Is it a Martian Manhunter?
It's an Invisible Man, so
Shazam.
it's closest to, I guess, Martian Manhunter because he can phase through things, but like he's his own thing. Like he's an invisible guy.
Okay.
He's his own thing, like David S. Pumpkins. The show takes a very gritty look at what that would be. There's a mystery. There is a lot of violence and a little too much like sexual assault for my taste.
You only like a soupçon of sexual assault. You're not a buffet guy,
right? Definitely.
Right.
So that's my I would say that's like my main grief, my main grievance is the word I'm looking for. That, and there's a character named A-Train. So in the original graphic novel, the character was named Marathon Man, and he's the fastest man in the world. He's their Flash substitute, and they changed him for a black man who is now called A-Train, and I don't like it. I think that any other character could have been black, but not the guy who's like, I'm an athlete, which I feel like is a very, on the nose thing, which I don't like. But that's just my personal opinion. But those are my main grievances. I think that like it would have been really well situated after Watchmen. Mm-hmm. But like
it looked a little bit like one of like that, somewhere in that vein.
Yeah, it's very much in that vein. Like even the lighting sometimes has a very Watchmen feel to it. But before the Zack Snyder DCEU verse, and that like I think that Zack Snyder's Superman, like his DCEU is a parody of like everything.
It does feel, especially now in hindsight, since they've aggressively pivoted away from that style, that template, it does feel very much like he took it so far in that direction, he broke it.
Right. So,
and then, by the way, like I am one of the weirdos that now, especially that we have some distance from it, I am a little bit glad that something like Batman v Superman exists, because it is such a profoundly bewildering movie. But what you absolutely cannot say is that he did not have a vision, and he did not commit to it real hard. And in a way, like there are no small swings to that movie,
right?
You know, and I do look. I'm glad that we didn't continue to go in that direction.
Yeah.
But I'm the weird guy who feels a little bit like we did miss out on something when they scrapped his version of Justice League.
You hear that, everyone? Lex is
no,
saying,
not
release the Snyder Cut. That's what he keeps saying.
I'm not saying release the Snyder Cut because it doesn't exist. They didn't finish it. Maybe you could get all that. The footage is somewhere, I'm sure. It's probably sitting in a storage facility or something, or storage facility, like it's on reels. It's on a hard drive somewhere, I would assume, but nobody's going to take the time and the expense to cut everything together, do all of the effects rendering, and actually distribute it in a way that's accessible to people. It's not a real thing. I get it, but it is not a real even if Zack Snyder says, yeah, it's totally out there, we're not going to see it. If we were going to see it, they would have shown it to us already. But I do think even if it was every bit as polarizing, every bit as over the top grim dark, I do think we would have gotten a version of it, much like Batman v Superman, that was indicative of a strong vision and a willingness to swing really, really, really hard. But like we're saying, I feel like he swung so hard that he broke that entire concept.
Right. So yes, yes. So The Boys, I feel like, exists like Snyder adjacent in that like it is like a version of what he created, but it actually finds humor in itself. Like it actually is really willing to dive into the psychological cost of the things that happen in this world. Mm-hmm. So I think that I recommend that people watch it. I think that hashtag trigger warning, like if graphic violence and sexual assault aren't your thing, or if you have a history with it, I think that it, like they're very nice about like doing, like putting the warning before the episode, but like it's rough, so like be aware. But yeah, I say check it out. Like the mystery is good. Carl Urban, good. Dennis Quaid's son, good. Yeah, and then I think that the way that they do the story is well done. And like my roommate said that maybe it would have been better as like a movie, and I think that you couldn't get across a lot of the character arcs if you had done it as a movie. I like that. I think it's just the right amount of episodes. It's 8 episodes long, not too much of a investment. I did it all in a day.
All right. Yeah, I know my good friend and friend of the show, JQ Salazar, has been a past guest. He was watching it recently, and he shot me a message being like, dude, I just watched the pilot for The Boys. You should watch this. You'd really like it. And I said to him, maybe one day I'll have time. Maybe one day I will have time for yet another show. I'm real backlogged on TV. So maybe one day I will have time for yet another show. But the fact that it's only 8 episodes makes it feel a little bit more digestible.
So what if you just didn't sleep tonight and instead take that 8 hours that you were going to sleep and invest them in The Boys?
I might do that.
So do that.
The thing is, like for me, that's not 100% outside the realm of possibility. That sounds like the type of shit I would do.
Right. So yeah, that's my, as non-spoiler as I can get about The Boys. My recommendation is check it out, worth seeing. Trigger warning. What are you into?
Well, if you are alive and attuned to the world of cinema at all, you may be aware that this past weekend, the 9th film from Quentin Tarantino was released, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Of course, being that it's a Tarantino movie, did not take very long for the takes to start flying fast and heavy. Generally, the movie has been very well received. There are, of course, always going to be people who aren't necessarily on board for the particular party, and I do think it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks what the reaction to the movie is like within called the Tarantino fandom, because I feel like of all of his works, this is I believe this is his longest feature to date at about 2 hours and 45 minutes, but also it's, what is his face?
Hateful Eight?
Oh, that's true. If you watch the expanded Netflix version too that they did, is probably longer than that.
Yeah.
But Hateful Eight, Hateful Eight's a pretty bulky movie. It's comparable right in length anyway, but it's certainly his slowest and his most ponderous.
Okay.
And it feels, that there's not as much, Tarantino is known, yes, for his dialogue, yes, for his pop culture references, but also his violence, certainly, his shocking violence. This is a movie that is largely devoid of that. There are instances of it that I won't go into because you should see this movie as unspoiled as possible. But largely it's contemplative. It deals with themes of facing your own potential looming irrelevance. I guess I should pause at this point to say I love this movie. I'm in love with this movie. It is my favorite movie of the year, in part because like Tarantino's other works, I see it, I absorb it, and then it makes me want to, almost need to, ravenously turn around and devour about 100 other movies that he used as reference points. Now, again, a lot of people might take issue with how kind of slow, kind of ponderous the movie is. All right, so you've got Leonardo DiCaprio and you've got Brad Pitt as your two leads. And DiCaprio plays Rick Dalton, who is an actor who was on a very successful Western TV show that got canceled. He was trying to transition into film, and it didn't quite pan out. So he's trying to figure out, how can I resuscitate my career? And he's playing, the heavy roles in pilots, and he's faced with the prospect of having to go to Italy and make Westerns. And you, Tara, and if you've listened to the show, you may know I'm a big spaghetti Western fan. I think Sergio Leone is one of the greatest directors in film history. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, one of the best directed movies in film history. Sergio Corbucci, likewise. Sergio Corbucci made the original Django, for example. So you know that Tarantino's a fan. He literally lifted the song from the movie and used it in the Django Unchained opening credits, and gave Franco Nero, the original Django, a cameo in that movie as well. But so there's a reference to Rick Dalton being asked by Sergio Corbucci to come make spaghetti Western in Italy, and it's seen at the time as like this mark of shame, right? But this is something that would actually happen during that period, set in the mid to late 60s. That's something that would happen, is that these Italian Western directors would be looking for the biggest A-list Hollywood stars that they could get, but those actors didn't want to go to Italy and make Westerns. It was seen as, if you'll pardon the use of the expression, seen as a bit of a ghetto. And so that's how you end up with actors who are maybe in a bit of a fallow period in their careers, like Burt Reynolds. That's how you get Burt Reynolds in Navajo Joe for Sergio Corbucci, for example. So like if stuff like this it tickles your fancy, if you're fascinated with that period of Hollywood, if you're fascinated with those movies and those artists and those actors and those directors, this movie is just, it's pure candy. But you also have an actor, and this is a theme that comes up repeatedly in the film, you have an actor who thinks his best days are almost assuredly behind him, and figuring out a way to come to terms with that uncertainty. How do I remain relevant? How do I continue to have something to say, something to contribute? And Brad Pitt's character is Cliff Booth, who's Rick Dalton's longtime friend, stuntman, gopher. He experiences his own version of this as well. But this too, and I was talking to JQ Salazar about this movie as well. He very much enjoyed it too. I said to him, listen, on top of everything we're talking about, maybe this it sounds like an absurd thing to say at this point, but good Lord, Brad Pitt is a movie star. I mean, he's able to, in this movie, be Robert Redford, Steve McQueen, and like Tom Laughlin as Billy Jack, all in one, and often multiple things at the same time within one scene.
Yeah,
it's and I don't necessarily, both of these guys give some of my favorite. I mean, I think my two favorite Brad Pitt performances are both for Tarantino. I think it's Cliff Booth in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's Aldo Raine in Inglourious Bastards.
Right.
And here I think he's done the same with DiCaprio. My favorite Leonardo DiCaprio performance, bar none, is still Calvin Candy in Django Unchained.
Right.
And I think Rick Dalton is a very close second, if not neck and neck. And I love profoundly the way it deals with, yes, these characters and their personal struggles, but also the film industry as it existed at the time. And again, your mileage may vary depending on how interesting you find all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you can't talk about the movie without also talking about Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate. Now, this movie, more so than I think any movie Tarantino has made, assumes not just knowledge of film history on the part of the audience, but actually knowledge of real world history and who Sharon Tate was and who Charlie Manson was and what happened was, the night that they showed up at the Cielo Drive house, Tex Watson and the girls, and murdered her unborn child and the guests, like Abigail Folger, who was the heir to the Folger coffee fortune, Wojciech Frykowski, who's a friend of theirs, and also Jay Sebring, who was a hairdresser. Manson's people murdered all of them, and it assumes you have context for that. It feels very much to me that it's assuming you have context for that.
Yeah.
The way that Sharon Tate is used as a character as part of the story, I'd be very curious to see how it plays for somebody who's completely unfamiliar with those events. Because if you know what's coming, obviously you meet her and she's vibrant and she's young and she's talented and she's got her whole life in front of her career in front of her. But if you know the real world events, you know it stops in a truly, truly horrible way.
Right.
And so the way Tarantino is able to sort of assume those expectations and play with those expectations, the way that pays off, I find ultimately very, very satisfying. But I would be very curious to see how all of those sections of the movie play if you have no idea who she was. There's just so much about this movie that speaks to me directly, or feels like it is speaking to me directly. And it helps as well that I have been crazy immersed in a lot of the films, for example, that the movie is pulling from very heavily.
Yeah.
Very recent. Like this movie came out at exactly the right time to completely hit a bullseye for me.
Yeah.
Like most of his movies, I'm sure it's going to be a little bit divisive, but people are generally seeming to like it. It's making a bunch of money. So I don't think we got to worry about this kid. I think he's going to be okay. But if I saw somebody, I don't know who said it, somebody on Twitter, but Quentin Tarantino's talked about how, he feels directing is a young man's game, right? He's talked for a long time about, I'm going to do 10 movies, then retire and maybe write novels or write, film analysis.
Okay.
This would be his 9th movie. He's talking about doing a Star Trek, which I think would be really funny. If that actually comes to pass, I think it'd be hilarious if his final movie was a Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
But this movie feels like the culmination of everything he has been playing with since he started making movies. And to paraphrase, again, I wish I could remember who was saying it, but to paraphrase what I saw somebody saying on Twitter was, if he were to retire on this one, I'd get it. I wouldn't want that. I want this dude to keep making movies. The fact that there's a real chance we're only going to get one more movie from this dude bums me out. But if he wanted to retire on this one, it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
This feels like it could be a career-defining statement. I love this movie a lot. And I understand, like, even if nothing about it rubs you the wrong way, and of course, look, there are people who have already taken issue, for example, with the depiction of Bruce Lee in the movie. Your mileage may vary, accepted. But I love this movie a lot, and there's going to be a lot to talk about, to pick apart. The cast in this thing is absolutely, absolutely wild. You see a lot of familiar faces from Tarantino's rep company that aren't necessarily in the trailers, but you've got, like, Pacino shows up for a minute. You've got Luke Perry in one of his final roles before he passed away. Timothy Olyphant. You've got Emile Hirsch. You've got Lena Dunham pops up for a second.
Oh, cool.
Which is interesting. But Kurt Russell is there for a minute. Bruce Dern has a part. It's fuck. I really like it. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how what direction the discourse moves in.
Yeah.
But again, I am very curious to know what it's like for people who don't know who Sharon Tate was, who don't know much of anything about the Manson murders, who don't know, Spahn Ranch, the Spahn movie ranch is a location in the movie. And if you don't, if you don't know anything about how the family essentially lived out on Spahn Ranch, you may not make that a direct association, right? Because they don't have there's not a voiceover explaining those elements of it for you.
Right.
But what is cool about there's a sequence where Cliff Booth visits the Spahn Ranch. He does a really, like, within this big movie, it's almost like there's a horror short film, and without over aggressive music cues, without any kind of like boo type thing, you know, based on the filmmaking language, you know this is a bad place.
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see how it plays, how those elements function within the story, from the point of view of somebody who doesn't know that history at all. And I don't think you can say that about any of his other movies. I think you could watch Inglourious Basterds not knowing a single thing about the Second World War, and you don't need to.
Right.
And maybe you don't need to know anything about late 60s Hollywood and Sharon Tate and the Manson family to enjoy this movie fully, but I know for sure you would get a great deal more out of it.
Right. Yeah. If I end up seeing it because I know nothing about old Hollywood, I will let you know how I feel and things that like maybe I missed. You'll be like, oh my gosh, did you catch this thing? And I'll be like, no.
Yeah, and I also read Helter Skelter, the book, like the definitive book on the Manson crimes that was written, co-authored by the prosecuting attorney in the case. And I read it many years ago, but there were a handful of things in the movie where I was like, oh yeah, that's right out of the book, right out of history, you know?
Yeah.
It's I can definitely see how it's not going to be for everybody. It feels like it is exactly for me.
Yeah.
I loved the shit out of it. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it again. Also, the soundtrack is dope, and it's a massive track list.
Yeah.
And I know that they've got to be doing some kind of vinyl release for this thing. But on the soundtrack, you know, he was a filmmaker who, I mean, I think right up till the present, when one of his soundtrack albums would come out, there'd be little snippets of dialogue from the movie in between tracks.
Yeah.
On the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood soundtrack, it's old radio ads from the era. So if you're listening to the entire soundtrack, you go through, and every so often, every like 3 songs or so, you'll get an old, like a retro radio ad that creates the experience of actually listening to the radio back in the day, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
I like this movie. Can you tell?
No, I couldn't.
Like I love it a lot. And I at a certain point, the better part of a year from now, when it's on home media and everybody's had a greater chance to digest it, I will almost certainly bring it in and talk about it, because it's almost certainly my number one of the year so far.
Okay, nice. Guys, let us know what you thought if you watched either The Boys or if you watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Let us know your thoughts. You can do so at Missing Outcast, MissingOutcast. That's on Twitter and Instagram. But if you just want to talk to Lex about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or you want to give him a bunch of spoilers for The Boys, where can they find you?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at the Alex Michael.
Ooh. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at TariJ, TariJay. And make sure to join us tomorrow. We have a special guest, Chris James. He came out with a graphic novel called Sons of Chaos. It's an amazing epic that is about the Greek independence revolution. It's about the Greek War of Independence.
Greeky. It's about fighting Greeky fight.
Yeah.
That's actually, when the publicist put out the press release, that's actually what it says. Yes, no, what is it? The sort of Greek revolution for independence against the Ottoman Turks.
Yes.
Really, no, it's a super cool book. We're very excited to talk to Chris about it. Book came out through IDW. You can pick it up, big, gorgeous hardcover edition. But we're gonna dive into that pretty hardcore tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. And keep an eye out on our Twitter. We'll post some caps from it, just so you can experience the sweet art. And then in our discussion tomorrow, we'll be diving into a lot of the story elements and the origin of the graphic novel itself. So definitely tune in for that.
It's going to be good talk.
Hell yeah. So until then, we will see you soon.